Hello everyone, Interact back here again with another episode of Entity Education. In this episode, we're going to be covering another killer that could make me apologize to an entire nation for what I might do to their language, Jiwoon Hak, probably better known as the Trickster. The Trickster does not have your normal base stats, instead he has the slower movement speed of 4.4 meters per second or 110%, and a terror radius of 24 meters. So let's move on to talking about his power, Showstopper. Basically, he has a ton of knives that he can rapid fire at survivors to injure them and eventually down them. In a very basic sense, he works similar to the Huntress, where he has a limited amount of blades, starting with 60 by default, and has to reload them at lockers whenever he runs out or whenever you want to refill. However, much unlike the Huntress, the Trickster is all about yeeting out blades like an old World War I machine gun. By pressing and holding mouse 2 on PC, you will enter the Trickster's quote-unquote throwing state. This will take you 0.35 seconds to do, and you will pull up your knives to start throwing. Exiting this state by stopping holding mouse 2 will take 1.25 seconds. While in the throwing state, you can either tap or hold down mouse 1 to throw knives. The base time between knife throws is 0.33 seconds, and you will actually alternate which hand you're throwing the knives from, making it so that you have to do small adjustments on the fly to be extremely accurate at longer distances. In addition to spawning from alternate hands, there's also a recoil built in to be about 5 degrees from where you were just aiming on subsequent throws. Based on footage, it seems to be just kind of randomized in which direction it will change your aim, but obviously it's never going to recoil downwards. The way that just about everything in his throwing state functions is kind of a bit odd, but basically everything will get slightly better the more knives that you throw in rapid succession, except for your movement speed that gets worse. After throwing 4 knives, your fire rate will be increased to 0.2911 seconds between throws, and after 8 knives, it will be increased to 0.2475 seconds between throws. Your movement speed will also start to get slower the more you throw, as I said, starting off at 3.86 meters per second or 96.5% speed, and this will start to get slower after you've thrown 8 knives, bottoming out at 3.68 meters per second or 92% speed after you've thrown 30 knives in total. There is a grace period of about 1 second where if you haven't thrown a knife, it will stop slowing you down more and will reset back to the beginning for how fast you're throwing and your movement speed. So as long as you're holding down the button, that's basically when these things will apply. Once you are out of knives, as I said, you do have to reload at a locker. This reload just takes 4 seconds by default. So now let's talk more about that whole laceration business and what actually happens when you hit people with knives. Survivors will take a health state of damage upon reaching 8 lacerations, so after being hit by 8 knives by default. Both the survivors and the killer will be able to see how much laceration any survivor has based on a light purple circle that will fill up around a survivor's portrait on the left-hand side. Thankfully, it does have little notches to tell you how many they have remaining if you do a quick count. Once the laceration meter hits full, after 7 knife hits by default, it will turn red, meaning that the next knife to hit that survivor will do 1 health state of damage, so if they're healthy it will make them injured, if they're injured it will down them. If a survivor manages to evade the Trickster for a while, their laceration meter will begin to slowly go back to being emptied. It takes 20 seconds by default for this regression to even start happening, and it will regress at a rate of -1 laceration after 4.255 seconds if the survivor is not running, or 1 laceration decay after 5.714 seconds if the survivor is running. This means that if you somehow got to a full 7 laceration and were 1 hit away from being downed, you would need to avoid being hit by a single knife for 49.787 seconds if you did not run at all, or 60 seconds if you were running the entire time. Survivors also lose 4 laceration each time they get struck by a basic attack. I assume this was implemented just to make sure melee, hatchet, huntress never happened again. So now let's talk about probably the worst designed part of his kit, main event. This is supposed to be his big power-up, go sicko mode thing, but yeah. Firstly, you'll only be able to gain main event after landing 20 knives, and you'll only be able to use it for 10 seconds after it fills up, before it begins to decay away, leaving you back with nothing. If you do activate main event, you will enter into it after 1.5 seconds, and start throwing knives at an increased rate of 0.197999 seconds between knives, and get slowed down to 3.86 meters per second or 96.5% speed, and the fire rate does not increase or decrease during this, and neither does the movement speed. Those are just static. After 10 seconds by default, or if you manually cancel it, you will get tinnitus for 5 seconds and just be unable to throw any more knives until your hearing clears up, I guess. The knives thrown in main event do not actually drain from your ammo counter, so you don't have to worry about not having enough knives to do main event. So with all that out of the way, let's talk about his add-ons now. We start at the common tier with Trick Pouch. This add-on just gives you 10 more knives. That's it. Next up is Memento Blades. This add-on will give you 100% bonus blood points for the Showstopper score events at the cost of moderately increasing each survivor's laceration meter. Despite sounding like a good thing, this actually means that it takes one extra knife to deal a full laceration meter to a survivor. Following that, we have Killing Part Chords. This add-on will slightly increase your movement speed while throwing your blades. This means an increase to your movement speed with your knives out of 0.054 meters per second or 1.35%, bringing you up to a starting movement speed of 3.734 meters per second or 93.35% speed at the start of your knife throwing state thingy, and making your minimum speed after throwing 30 knives 2.734 meters per second or 68.35% speed. And the final common add-on is Inferno Wires. This add-on will slightly increase the duration of main event. This means an increase to the duration of your main event of 1.4285714 seconds, bringing it up to a total of 11.4285714 seconds total. The real way that this works is by reducing the amount of charges you lose per second from 2 to 1.75, with the maximum amount of charges being 20, but if I have to suffer through these large ass strings of numbers, so do you. Moving on to the uncommon add-ons now, we start with Tequila Moonrock. This add-on will moderately increase the duration of your main event. This means an increase to the duration of your main event of 3.33333 repeating seconds, bringing it up to 13.33 repeating seconds total. Once again, in reality, this just changes the amount of charges drained per second from 2 to 1.5, with the max charges being 20, but once again, just suffer along with me for now. Next up is On Target Single. This add-on will slightly increase the time before laceration meter starts to decay. This means an increase of 2 seconds to the time before the laceration meter starts to decay, bringing it up to 22 seconds total. Following that is Lucky Blade. This add-on will slightly increase each survivor's laceration meter decay duration while you are out of ammo. This means an increase of 1.0639575 seconds, bringing it up to 5.3191489 seconds per laceration to fully decay, assuming that the survivor is not running. The number is different if the survivor is running, and that will be on screen somewhere. And once again, you do have to literally be on 0 knives held for this add-on to even function. Once again, this is coded in a way that is weird and changes the amount of charges. It's coded really oddly, but whatever. Next up is Ji-Woon's Autograph. This add-on will slightly increase the initial throw rate of your knives. This essentially just starts you off at 2 knives thrown, so it will only take you 2 knives to start actually decreasing the time between your throws, or increasing your throw rate, because increase and decrease, I don't know, man. And the final uncommon add-on is Caged Heart Shoes. This add-on will moderately increase your movement speed while throwing knives. This means an increase to your movement speed with your knives out of 0.13 meters per second or 3.25%, bringing you up to a starting movement speed of 3.81 meters per second or 95.25% speed at the start of your knife throwing state thing, and making your minimum speed after throwing 30 knives 2.81 meters per second or 70.25% speed. Moving on to the rare add-ons now, we start with the Waiting for You watch. This add-on will considerably increase each survivor's laceration meter decay duration while you are out of knives. This means an increase of 2.1279787 seconds, bringing it up to 6.3829787 seconds per laceration to fully decay, assuming the survivor is not running. The number is different if the survivor is running, and that number will be on screen somewhere. And once again, this is coded in a weird way that still makes no sense to me. It could have been done a lot better, but oh well. Next up is Ripper Brace. This add-on will moderately increase the time before the laceration meter starts to decay. This means an additional 3 seconds, bringing it up to 23 seconds total. Next up is Melodious Murder? I don't know. English is tough. This add-on will moderately decrease each survivor's laceration meter. This means a reduction to the maximum amount of knives required by 1, bringing it down to 6 to fill the meter and 7 to actually do the injury. Next up is Fizz Spin Soda. This add-on will moderately increase your initial throw rate. This basically means you will start off at 3 knives thrown, so it will take only 1 knife to start actually increasing your throw rate or decreasing the time between throws, because increase and decrease mean the same thing in different contexts. And the final rare add-on is Bloody Boa. You get 15 more knives. That's it. Going up a tier now, the first very rare add-on is Trick Blades. This add-on should be base kit, but oh well. It will make your knives bounce off the environment up to 2 times, and make ricochet hits give you some extra BP. BP add-ons at very rare again behavior. Bold choice. Next up is Edge of Revival Album. This add-on will make blades shatter when hitting the environment, dealing 50% laceration to nearby survivors. This means that your knives basically explode while hitting anything that isn't a survivor. However, the radius is only about 1 meter, so you pretty much need to be landing it right next to them anyways for it to function, and you only get half of a laceration. So. Next up is Diamond Cufflinks. This add-on will make it so when a survivor's laceration is 1 hit away from max, their aura will be revealed to you for 6 seconds. And that's all it will do. And finally, we have Cut Through You Single. This add-on will make your knives pierce through survivors, and any survivor hit beyond the first one will only gain 50% laceration. It does exactly what it says. So let's talk about G-Wound's ultra rare add-ons now. We start with Iridescent Photo Card. This add-on will make any survivor who is 1 hit away from basically being injured by laceration or has a full laceration meter become exposed. So anyone, when their meter is red, they're exposed. That's it. And the final ultra rare add-on and the final add-on in general is Death Throes Compilation. This add-on will make the amount of laceration you deal based on how close you are to your target, starting at a minimum of 50% and going up to a maximum of 200%. Once you miss with a single knife, the value gets reset back to its default. Based on some testing I did, it looks like obviously point blank shots start at 50% laceration, and they seem to increase by 50% per knife landed, and at about 16 or so meters, the knives will just do normal amounts of laceration, so it'll start with just 1 laceration per knife, and it will increase by 50% per knife landed. So the first knife is 1 laceration, the second knife is 1.5, the next knife is 2, and then it caps out at 2 because that's the max. But good luck landing knives at those distances with a survivor moving like a chicken with their head cut off anyways. So now let's talk about the teachable perks that you will unlock when you put your blood points into We Have the Joker at Home. At level 30, you'll unlock the teachable for the perk Starstruck. Starstruck will activate when you pick up a survivor, and will make all survivors within your terror radius suffer from the exposed status effect. This effect happens anytime a survivor touches your terror radius while you are carrying a survivor as well. And it will persist even if survivors leave your terror radius while you are carrying a survivor for 26/28/30 seconds. Starstruck will go on a cooldown for 60 seconds after you're no longer carrying a survivor, either because you dropped them or hooked them. At level 35, you'll unlock the teachable for the perk Hex Crowd Control. Really going to get that tie-in with the popularity of League in Korea, huh, behavior? I know it's a pun on concert crowds, but Crowd Control will of course spawn a Hex Totem since it is a Hex perk. While the totem is still standing, anytime a survivor rush vaults a window, meaning they're holding down shift to sprint, not only that they actually got a fast vault, but if they're just trying to fast vault, the window will become blocked for 10/12/14 seconds. This shockingly has absolutely no cooldown at all, and could, in theory, affect every window on a map if survivors really wanted it to. And finally, at level 40, you'll unlock the teachable for the perk No Way Out. No Way Out will grant you a token for each unique survivor you hook during the match, so a maximum of 4 tokens. For each token, once the final generator is completed, both exit gates will be blocked for a base of 10 seconds plus 4/6/8 seconds for each token, up to a maximum of time of 26/34/42 seconds. So let's talk about some tips for playing the crossover between BTS and BTK. I think the most important thing of playing Trickster is pretty much knowing when to use your power, as is often the case with basically every killer in the game. Real good insight there, me. You can't really get much usage out of the power at stronger loops like jungle gyms or main buildings where there's lots of corners, lots of LOS breakers. The loops are really tall so you can't throw over them. You're typically going to be stuck just playing those normally, try to mind game them, moonwalk them, do all that fancy stuff. The only place you'll be able to really use your knives is out in the open, obviously, and on loops where there's like waist-high walls instead of, over the head high walls, so you can actually throw over them, or loops that have lots of gaps in them, because the hitboxes of the knives are pretty much like Deathslinger levels. So you can throw through those tiny little gaps in, Shack and other places, although I wouldn't recommend trying to throw knives at Shack. As far as the other part of his power, main event, is concerned, you're really only going to see usage out of it in very niche scenarios, such as hook dives, people trying to unhook basement, and survivors just kind of being clumped up for some reason out in the open. You can use it in these situations, and it's actually really good when you do get a situation like, 3 people are in the basement for some odd reason. But the time limitation of having to activate it once the meter gets charged up within that short time frame means that it'll probably just not happen like once every 10 matches or so, if that. You can, in theory, use it when you are just chasing a survivor to try and down them, but once again, it really only works in situations where they can't just hide behind a tree or turn a corner and drop a pallet and kind of stop you from just walking behind them. So now let's talk about perk builds. As with most newer killers, there isn't really like a 100% this is the best build, no clickbait edition for the Trickster. So instead I'll talk about general perks I see being run on him and some that I've talked to people who play Trickster for some odd reason, and what they've suggested. Typically, as with most killers that lack in the mobility and map pressure department, you're going to want slowdowns or ways to make the early game easier. This typically comes in the form of running Corrupt Intervention and or Hex Ruin. I've seen some people start to run Pop Goes the Weasel with Hex Ruin, the typical justification being that Ruin slows down the early game just all over the map, and once the map goes on and you lose some farther away generators and you've kind of got your 3 to 4 gens that you want to defend, and maybe Ruin is cleansed, Pop becomes better and lets you defend and do more damage to the generator progress. As I said, I talked to people who, for some reason, play Trickster, and I've heard a number of different perks that they like running and ones that you might want to consider. I've been told that if you're running Pop, typically Brutal Strength kind of follows that, since you need to break pallets, and behavior keeps adding breakable walls to every single map in the game. Some players said that they like to run more utility-focused perks, such as Save the Best for Last, Monitor and Abuse, or Bamboozle. Save the Best for Last is mostly being brought to save you time when you are forced to M1, and you can theoretically save stacks by using your power to down the obsession. Monitor and Abuse is just there to make your small terror radius even smaller, and let you get really up close and personal with survivors so you can land knife hits early on in chases much easier. Bamboozle is just for shutting down really strong loops with windows, so you can try and force survivors into the weaker loops where you can throw over them and actually hit them with your knives. Obviously, if you asked me, I'd say run barbecue and chili, but that's because I'm just addicted to barbecue and chili. I asked about tracking perks and which ones they would want to run, but for the most part, the responses that I got back was mostly that there aren't really enough perk slots to worry about tracking perks, since you are kind of required to run slowdown and utility perks, and Trickster is a bit on the weaker side, to put it nicely. So let's move on to some meme builds now for the tricky boy. The first meme build is actual Trickster. For this build, you're going to want to bring perks that will confuse survivors so you can actually live up to your name of being a trickster. For this build, you're going to want to bring your, weird, obscure perks that nobody actually runs, like Trail of Torment, Insidious, Dark Devotion, and then Tinkerer. People actually do run that one, but whatever. Add-ons don't really matter. You're mostly just there to kind of confuse survivors with having a weird tear radius modification, modulation, nonsense, and possibly jump scare survivors, and mess with their perception of where you are and where you aren't. Normally I have a second meme build for these videos, but Behavior's had some really uninspired add-on design for the past few killers, and Trickster's power is just kind of there. If you can think of one, please leave it in a comment below, because I tried, kind of, and I couldn't come up with one. Anyways, that's it for this episode of Entity Education, covering Jiwoon Hak, probably, I hope I said that right, probably better known as the Trickster. I'm sorry if you're Korean. As always, links to social media, Twitch, Patreon, everything's in the description. Leave a like on the video if you liked the video. Subscribe for more in the future, blah blah blah. As always, thanks for watching, guys. I do appreciate it. And I will see you in the next video, which will probably be the Resident Evil killer and will probably not take as long. I've just been doing a lot of stuff in my real life with my kids and allergies, and I got a sinus infection that made it so I couldn't record audio for like a fucking month, and anyways, I'll see you for the next one, the Resident Evil killer, which I'm really hyped up, and if it's fucking Lady Dama whatever, I don't fucking care. It better be Heisenberg, because Heisenberg's way cooler. Don't add me. Goodbye.